The afternoon sun had no right to be that bright on a day when a life felt so heavy. Inside his chest, something had cracked long ago. But today the fracture felt fresh, raw, almost audible. Arvin Hale had mastered silence. The silence of boardrooms, the silence of empty hallways, the silence that comes after a child finally cries themselves to sleep. Yet as he stared at the glass in his hand in the quiet corner of a nearly empty daytime bar, he realized he wasn't escaping anything. He was simply sitting face to face with everything he had been running from. The air smelled faintly of citrus cleaner and lemon slices. Sunlight poured through wide windows like truth he couldn't hide from, and for the first time since his world collapsed, Arvin felt seen, not by anyone else, but by the weight of his own exhaustion. That was the moment he sensed someone standing near him, warmth and perfume and presence, and the soft whisper that followed would change everything, as if destiny had leaned in beside him during broad daylight and taken a chair. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and stories where broken hearts learn how to beat again, then please like, comment, share, and subscribe to Stories of Kindness. Your support helps more people find hope in moments they thought were endings. Arvin was 37, a company director known by employees for his seriousness and impossible standards. In the office, he was decisive, calm, efficient. People only saw the tailored suits and the cool eyes that rarely betrayed emotion. No one saw the lunchboxes in his briefcase or the folded paper cranes made by small hands left in his pockets like secret prayers. He was a single father, not by choice, but by the brutal speed with which life sometimes rewrites futures. His wife, Naira, had been the light that filled rooms without trying, and the mother whose laughter wrapped around their son like a blanket he could never outgrow. A rainy road, a tired driver heading home late, one phone call that split time into before and after. This was the story he never told aloud. Since then, mornings became battles against absence, and nights became long negotiations with memories that refused to soften. He never meant to end up at the bar at midday. He had left the office after a meeting where new numbers were discussed, strategies planned, voices droning around him while his mind lingered somewhere between past and present. He had smiled too tightly, nodded too automatically, signed too mechanically. When it was over, instead of heading back to his glass building of structure and responsibility, he wandered. The bar appeared like a quiet harbor, a place where no one would demand explanations. It was nearly empty because the day was still young, sunlight reflecting on polished tables, faint music humming in the background. He sat down not for whiskey or escape, but for the stillness that exists when the world slows just enough to let grief breathe. That was when he noticed him first. Yes, the title of this strange chapter in his life hinged on a pronoun confusion, because what caught Arvin's eye wasn't romance at first, it was reflection. A young man, perhaps in his late 20s, sat 2 seats away, staring into a soft drink with a look far too old for his age. But before Arvin could linger on that thought, she appeared, like sunlight deciding to stand upright. Her name was Mirielle Solis, and she carried herself like someone who had learned how to stay gentle without becoming weak. She worked part-time nearby and had wandered into the bar after finishing her shift early, drawn by the same quiet as Arvin, but for different reasons. Her life had also been rearranged by invisible storms, an aging mother who forgot names but remembered lullabies, dreams placed on pause, courage learned the slow way. She noticed Arvin before he noticed himself. Pain recognizes pain, not loudly but with a soft certainty. His shoulders were straight but heavy, his hands controlled but tired, his eyes full of stories he refused to tell anyone. She didn't plan to speak, yet something urged her. She watched as the bartender returned. Arvin reached for his wallet, stopped midway, and simply gazed at the ring still resting on his finger. That small golden circle, catching sunlight, carried more confession than words ever could. Mirielle stepped closer, heart thudding for reasons she didn't fully understand. She leaned near, the afternoon light wrapping both of them, and in a tone gentle enough not to startle the broken parts inside him, she whispered an offer made of compassion rather than flirtation, the promise that the tab was on her if he would allow himself, just for today, not to go home alone to silence, but to take her home. Not in the way strangers expect, but in the way two quiet souls carry each other toward warmth. He did not answer aloud, he simply breathed differently. Not a dialogue, but a shift. He wasn't looking for romance. He wasn't looking for rescue. He was looking for a reason to stand up again. They walked outside together into the bright day, city noises rising and falling, the rhythm of life continuing whether hearts agreed or not. He suggested they go to the park instead of anyone's house, where the open sky felt less confining. So they went, buying coffee from a small cart along the way, sitting under a broad tree that filtered sunshine into dappled patterns on the grass. Arvin began to talk, not in speeches but in fragments, about deadlines and daycare runs, about a little boy named Iron who loved dinosaurs and strawberries, about how laughter lived in echo now. Muriel listened the way rain listens to earth, patient and without interruption. She shared too, about fear of losing her mother to the slow erasure of memory, about postponing music school to stay, about the way people assume strength simply because you don't fall apart where they can see you. The afternoon expanded around them, filled with distant children's voices, rustling leaves, and the smell of grass warming under the sun. Something uncoiled in Arvin, something he had kept locked for years. He realized he wasn't the only one balancing on thin emotional bridges. Muriel laughed with softness, cried without apology, and carried honesty with grace. The young man from the bar earlier passed through the park paths, earbuds in, moving along with his own battles invisible to them both, and it struck Arvin how many stories walked around unnoticed each day. He felt the smallest shift inside, like windows being opened after a long winter. They didn't exchange dramatic declarations. Instead, they shared quiet honesty, which sometimes heals more deeply than passion. Days began to repeat with new color after that. They didn't rush anything. Muriel started visiting Arvin's office area during her breaks, bringing homemade sandwiches, insisting he eat, reminding him that life requires fuel. He invited her to meet Irene slowly and carefully, not wanting to confuse his son or his own heart. When they finally met, it was in broad daylight with wind-fluttering kites overhead. Muriel kneeled to Iron's level, not to replace what had been lost, but to witness who he was. The little boy, cautious at first, handed her a paper crane from his pocket, one he said he could share, but only if she promised not to disappear too fast. The way Muriel's eyes softened at that was when Arvin realized that love sometimes returns not as thunder, but as a steady sunrise. Yet healing wasn't simple. There were setbacks like shadows that lengthen unexpectedly. Arvin felt guilt like a second heartbeat. How dare he smile again? How dare he imagine futures that didn't carry only grief? Some nights he sat awake on the edge of his bed, staring at old photo frames, whispering apologies he couldn't stop forming in his mind. Muriel understood without being told. She had her own night sitting at her mother's bedside, listening to half-remembered childhood songs, wondering who she was if the one who raised her forgot her. They didn't fix each other. They simply stood near one another while life slowly repaired what it could. Work changed too. Employees began to notice that Arvin, the once distant boss, paused now when someone seemed off. He scheduled reasonable hours, added flexible policies for parents and caregivers, and noticed how often people needed permission to be human. His own suffering had carved space inside him, and compassion moved in where anger once lived. Muriel encouraged this, reminding him quietly that strength does not require hardness. The company culture warmed the way a room warms when curtains are drawn back to let daylight in. One particular afternoon marked a turning point. It was a school event day, sunlight pouring over colored banners and unevenly painted art pinned proudly to walls. Irene stood on stage in a tiny costume, scanning the crowd with bright eyes until he found Arvin and Muriel sitting together. He smiled in that unstoppable way children do when they see home in more than one person. In that moment, Arvin felt tears slip free, not of sorrow alone, but of gratitude that life had not ended when he thought it had. It had simply paused, waiting for courage. The story did not become perfect after that. Life rarely does. Muriel's mother had good days and forgetful days. Arvin still missed Naira every time sunlight fell on empty space beside him, but grief and love learned to coexist. They celebrated small victories, a morning without heaviness, a laugh that surprised them, a dinner where silence felt comfortable instead of sharp. He realized that bringing Muriel home had never been about a dress or walls. It was about allowing his heart a place to rest again. As you reach this moment with them, if this journey of brokenness, resilience, and gentle healing touched your heart even a little, I would be deeply grateful if you liked, commented, shared, and subscribed. Your support helps Stories of Kindness continue sharing moments that remind us we are not alone in our battles. Before we close, I have a small special request. Please comment what part of the story stayed with you the most, and what act of kindness in your own life changed something you thought never would. The afternoon that had begun in a quiet bar under a blaze of daylight had become a doorway. A whisper had turned into a path, and a tired single father who had gone there only to disappear for a while instead discovered he was still capable of showing up for life. Muriel, who thought she had nothing left to offer except quiet strength, found that her presence could be a home someone else returned to. Under the open sky that first day, neither of them had promised forever. They had simply agreed not to walk alone. And sometimes that is how forever begins, not with thunderclaps or fireworks, but with sunlight falling across two people who decide, in the middle of an ordinary day, to carry hope back inside.